Hello. Hey, Aurelia. Hello, everyone who's joining in. I am Kyndall Rothaus, and I am delighted and excited to be interviewing my friend, Aurelia Dávila Pratt, whose book I have right here, A Brown Girl's Epiphany. Um, if you don't already know Aurelia, she is someone that you want to know. She, in addition to writing this book, she's also the pastor of Peace of Christ Church in Round Rock, Texas. And she also, I've never heard you say this about yourself, but I'm going to share it because it's so fancy. She was also named by Sojourners Magazine as one of the 10 Christian women shaping the church in 2022. I share that not just because it's fancy, but because it's true. I'll say more about that later and how much I think Aurelia is someone who is reimagining and being super innovative with church. But we're here really to talk about her book. So thanks, Aurelia, for being here. Is there anything you want to add to that introduction?
No, it's kind of fun to be introduced by a really close friend. I think that's a first for interviews I've been doing.
Yeah, and I wanted to also say, in addition to the sort of more professional parts of your life, Aurelia has been one of my dearest friends for, I was doing the math today, I think probably 12 years now.
Yeah.
Um, and so this interview is a particular honor, not just because she wrote a great book, which she did, but also because you're just one of the best human beings that I know.
Hmm.
And so I am excited to get to share you with more people. Um,
Yay.
so also I wore
I
the
know your Las Ofrendas series.
snake earrings in honor of your chapter with the snakes in
Yes.
it.
It's so funny. I had a dream about snakes 2 nights ago, like a really intense dream. And I was like, oh my gosh, I haven't dreamt about snakes since I wrote about it in my book.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Not for the interview, but we've totally got to talk about your dream later.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so in your book, I didn't say the subtitle, which is Reclaim Your Intuition and Step into Your Power, which I love. And throughout your book, but also just throughout your ministry and your life, you talk a lot about Imago Dei, this
Yeah.
theological concept of being made in the image of God. And so I thought we would start out this interview with an easy question, which is like, just tell me, why is this concept so important to you?
Yeah, I think that for me, and let me just also say before I answer for myself, I am a pastor of a community and I talk about Imago Dei all the time, and it resonates across the board. And I see people in my community using it now to explain things or to verbalize an experience or how they're feeling. And I can see that, this resonates for many different reasons. Oftentimes, whatever is at the heart of your own internal struggles or barriers that keep you from living into your fullness, your God given image. For me, that has always been this struggle to trust myself. I
Mm-hmm.
second guess myself all the time. I'm very indecisive. I just go back and forth on decision making, and this is, annoying at in the least of ways, and really very troublesome to my own spirit in the most intense of ways in terms of navigating my spiritual life, leading a community, parenting. This struggle to trust myself is has always and often been a theme lining my life. But when I do the spiritual work of not just saying I believe in Imago Dei, but the spiritual work of embodying it, living it out, I realize that, this is not reflecting the image of God in me to not trust myself. So the work becomes for me learning to listen to myself, listen to my intuition, honor the spirit of God within me, and go about my day with that posture. So that's what that means for me. But I think for others it brings up various different struggles that we can overcome when we're embracing Imago Dei.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think for you it's like the practice of writing the book itself was living into that Imago Dei, like trusting yourself. I really do have something worth saying. I really can be an author. I
Yeah.
really can trust what my gut and my intuition and my creativity are prompting me, and like put it down on the page and put it out there for the world to see. And so this is the physical proof that
Yes.
you've been doing that. Um,
Absolutely.
and related to that, you have at the beginning, near the beginning of the book, you talk about kind of this wake up call you had in 2016, like after your daughter was born and Trump was elected, and that was kind of the first time in your life where you really began to start owning in a public way, like your own brown identity and kind of grappling with that.
Yeah.
Um, and you had this line, which I thought is really powerful here, that you said, embracing my brownness has been the most crucial step I could take toward healing.
Yeah.
Um, and I just wonder if you could say how specifically like writing about your brownness in book form, this very public act, like how has that contributed to your healing? And has it healed you in ways that surprised you?
Yeah. I mean, even just as no one, that's such a thoughtful question. So I'm thinking of things I haven't really thought of before. But, going off of the theme of my struggle to trust myself, a lot of that is rooted in racial traumas
Mm,
because of experiences, I had that sort of othered me or othered other brown people around me throughout the course of my life, kind of barring access to things like acceptance, being included, um, and being afforded certain opportunities or being seen in certain ways. So I really feel like for me, writing this book that is talking a lot about really intricate microaggressions I experienced was a very vulnerable act. And I'll also say it was a courageous act because when you share about blatant experiences of racism, everyone can really get on board and kind of
mm,
acknowledge that they see racism there. They can also differentiate themselves from the situation in any way they might be complicit, you know. And so it's almost in some ways easier for people reading to see what's happening and identify it as racism. But when you're sharing microaggressions that are very nuanced, you're really risking
mm,
people saying, oh, you're complaining, oh, you're just being nitpicky, like you're whining, you're being a victim, or just disregarding you altogether. So for me, it was really an act of courage and an act of self validation to say, this is what happened. This is not crazy. I'm going to acknowledge this and call it out and name it. And I don't need anybody else to put their stamp of approval on that.
mm.
So for me, that was really healing because it is related. And we all have our different intersections of identity that contribute to, disconnect from Imago Dei. But for me, that was a huge part of it. And I needed to be able to name that um, as an integral part of my own healing.
Yeah. I love that line you had about not needing anyone else's stamp of approval. Um, and I hear you too that when we try to share microaggressions, it's so much easier for people to be dismissive of them. So it is a risky thing. I would say too, on the flip side of that sort of negative aspect, on the positive side, I think someone reading this book who's open to hearing it. I mean, that was my experience as I was reading, was like, oh, like it was very eye-opening because it was like these are the little things, the little
Yeah.
microaggressions that build up over a lifetime that you know, myself as a white person, like I'm not always aware that they're happening. And so to be given the gift of seeing the world through your eyes, I think it's really powerful. So I'm glad that you were courageous enough to do it. And I also want to say something about you and courage, because you're an Enneagram 6, and I often think that 6s are the most courageous people because you tend to live with the most fear. So
Yeah.
it's like, you know, you really have to dig in and find your courage.
Mm-hmm.
It's that those fears are even louder, I think, for 6s than some of us. And
You've
so
said
I
that
don't
to
know.
me before, and that really, really like transformed my perspective on myself. On it, like
Mm,
that stuck with me because I remember you saying that to me during my installation service where you preached, and that was like 4.5 years ago, and that has really stuck with me. And I remember when the pandemic hit and we went into lockdown, and everyone, there was just this, you could feel the anxious energy across the world, across the country. And of course, you could see it playing out on social media. And I remember telling myself, like, wow, like you have the stamina to deal with this. Like you've been training for this moment. You're used to this like intense level of anxiety.
yeah. Mm,
So
yeah. Yeah, I really do. I think you have you're like a fear and courage expert. And
wow. Oh my
yeah.
gosh.
I'm gonna start adding that
I'm
to
gonna
your
add
bio.
that to my,
Yeah.
yeah.
um but so because you've had to dig so deep to find that courage, like what would you say to somebody else who is maybe feeling afraid of writing a book or preaching a sermon or in some way naming some of these tender parts of our identities and stories, like if they're feeling afraid but yet there's a part of them that wants to share it, do you have any
Yeah.
things
I think
for
my
us?
advice is find your grounding and
Yeah.
prioritize it in your life. Because I think that when you are afraid or vulnerable or doing anything that feels really risky, you feel untethered and you experience upheaval. Like fear creates an internal upheaval. So for me, my grounding is the belief of Imago Dei, and specifically the mantra, remember who you are, which I talk about in the book. I am constantly having to practice the belief of that. And I use the words, remember who you are, to get myself there, and to ground me in the truth that no matter what happens, I can remember who I am. I can remember that I am made in God's image. And it doesn't matter, what people's opinions are. Do those things hurt? Do those things wound? Yes. And it doesn't take away from the truth of who I am. And so whenever I'm needing to do a vulnerable thing or a brave thing, I just try to ground myself in that remembrance and go back to that in the embodied ways that feel right to me. So, a walk in my garden or just sitting outside and breathing in the breeze, like whatever sounds grounding and feels grounding to an individual, that is what is grounding to them. That is where they can get realigned with their Imago Dei through, that experience or whatever mantras are helpful. But I mean, really, that's just what I do. I just try to remember who I am. Nothing changes that. Nothing that happens changes that for me.
Yeah. I've really learned a lot just watching you practice that. Like those are not just words that you're saying. That is like something that you live out. Um, so I wish there was like time to just ask you questions about every single chapter. And we don't have that much time, so I decided the way to approach this would be to just pick out a couple of the chapters that are speaking the most to me right now. So, um, I don't know, maybe that's a little
I
selfish,
love
but
it.
that's the way it jumped out at me. Okay. So, um I've had the pleasure of reading your book twice now. And what stood out to me a lot this on the second go around was this concept of, and for those who haven't read your book yet, you do this beautiful thing that I really love, where the first half of the book is about stepping out of things that are, harmful, and then stepping into our power. And I just love that. I think so often in more progressive Christian circles, we sometimes just do the deconstructing
Yeah.
and don't always find our way into the power. Um, but one of the things you talk about stepping out of is productivity culture. And I I have had multiple people in my life who independent of like people who are independent of our friendship, but who have told me that they follow your church Peace of Christ because of the innovative work that you all are doing. Um, and so I was just struck when I reread this part about your community. So I'm just going to read a little portion and then ask you about it.
Okay.
You talked about how you said my community does this radical thing where we don't have a Sunday service once a month. So once a month, you guys just don't meet at all. We call it Feed Your Soul Sunday, and every first Sunday, we encourage people to do something that gives them pure, uninhibited joy. And then you talk about how even though my co-pastors and I were nervous to pitch this idea, it was well received and is now a beloved fixture within our church culture. We rest. We rest because we are a small community and everyone shoulders some part of the work. We rest because our pastors are multi-vocational and the traditional model of worship was not sustainable without leading to burnout. We rest because we assessed our particular needs rather than comparing ourselves to how church is supposed to be done. We realize that a regular Sunday off would help us thrive. We rest so that we have more energy to create opportunities for deeper relationships. We rest because we are interested in reimagining sacred community outside of the constant need to produce. What year was that you guys made that call? Do you remember?
Well, it was before the pandemic, but it was we rolled it out in 2020. So we had January and February and March, and then the pandemic hit and everything went online. So it almost
Yeah.
seems like that was a pandemic created thing, but no, we made that choice before we knew there
Well,
was going to
that's
be a
what,
pandemic.
yeah, that was my memory of it too, because
Yeah.
I remembered that happening and kind of watching it from afar as you guys kind of posted about it and talked about it. And you know, I remember just being in awe, like, what? Like, wow, they can do that. And then just sort of seeing you roll that out and you know, post pandemic, I mean, we're not really post pandemic, but you know what I mean. On this side of the pandemic, I think lots of churches are thinking about like, what do we do now? But like you guys were having these conversations before the rest of us.
Mm.
And I think I have heard this repeated refrain throughout the pandemic of like, things cannot go back to normal. Things cannot be the same after this. Like this cultural event needs to change us and it needs to change the church. Um, and I think Peace of Christ has been modeling that before us, honestly, before the pandemic even hit. um, so I just wonder if you could say a little bit more about your faith community and that spirit of innovation that you all bring that allows you to sort of move out of the productivity mindset. Like, how does that happen? How did you get to a place where you have a community that can move in those ways?
I mean, I don't know that we set out to be as innovative as I do feel like we are now, but I do feel like we've always had a desire to be more team oriented than like the traditional hierarchy of a pastoral staff. And so, even though we didn't always live into that, and even though we still have more ways we could live into it now, that spirit has always marked our community. And because of that, I just think that there's more collaboration when we vision and make big decisions. And it's just such a part of our culture that there's a lot of collaboration going on. And I just think it gives us energy and courage to think outside of the box. And I also think that, you know, none of us are full time on staff and we don't own a building. So there are certain things that make it really hard to make radical changes.
Mm.
And I think some of those things that could feel like cons, like not having any money, are the exact things that enable us to live as authentically as possible as a community.
Mhm.
So, you know, it's just always holding things lightly because there are pros and cons to everything. But I do ultimately think that in our weaknesses, we have found so much of our superpowers. And as a community, I am really proud of us because we were able, before the pandemic forced our hand, we were able to let go of comparing what church is supposed to be, living in fear about that, making decisions in fear. We've never really had like any one person like driving our payroll, you know what I mean? Like we don't have any like affiliations giving us money. We just raise it among the community. And so there's just this space, honestly, to do things differently. And I think because we are able to function in a healthy way, like our organization, I would currently would describe as pretty healthy. There's a lot of trust. So the community trusts the decisions that we make, and they know that it's not this top-down thing, and that there's a lot of intention in anything we suggest.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm proud of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I was actually talking to one of your congregants the other day, and he said it's the healthiest church he's ever been a part of.
Wow.
Um, your story about not having money almost allows the creativity. It reminds me of that lovely story in your book, where as a kid you didn't have enough money to buy wrapping paper
Yeah.
for the birthday party, and your mom did this really creative thing of like hand drawing on a paper bag, and how at the time you were you were too embarrassed to appreciate that.
Mhm.
um,
Yeah.
but looking back, you can see how she took what could be perceived as lack and was like really, and she was really creative. um
Yeah. Yeah, I think we move in the world as people of comparison and we mimic each other. And I that's another beautiful, there's so many gifts of Imago Dei, but one of them is authenticity. And when you're truly walking in your Imago Dei, like you are very authentic because you know who you are, you remember who you are, you don't need to feel like an imposter, you don't need to feel like you need to compare yourself. Like, you know, the fullness of that image of Imago Dei is that we're each honoring our authenticity. And so I think in that little example, I was just like any other kid might be. I was just comparing myself to what is normal and feeling like an outsider because I, you know, had to do it a different way. But yeah, I love the beauty of hindsight and being able to say, "Wow, that was beautiful, actually." And
yeah.
I admire in humans of all ages who just don't even need that lesson, who can just see the
Mm.
beauty in different things right off the bat.
Yeah, I feel like most of us need that lesson, but I mean, and I'm thinking too, when I think about the creativity of your community, how as a I've been a pastor myself, and so many of us who are in ministry, I think we yearn for that, we long for that, we want to do things differently. Um, but sometimes there are just so many, as you mentioned, like barriers to that. And one of the primary barriers, I think, is that fear.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, as the fear expert, um, like
I love this.
what would you say to not to the pastors in this moment, but to the congregations who are scared of like not doing everything the way it has always been done. Like they have that fear. Do you have anything you would
Yeah,
say?
I mean, I have compassion for those people because I am a highly anxious person. And I, like you said, I'm an Enneagram 6, and I don't necessarily embrace change. Change is really hard for me, and it takes me a long time to adjust to change. So I really have compassion for people who, are holding on tight to traditions. I also love traditions. I love doing the same thing every year for my birthday, or like eating the same meal, or Christmas, or whatever. I love those kinds of things. So I'm actually someone who is more prone to holding on tightly to things. And I think again it goes back to Imago Dei as the starting point for any person's faith foundation, because community is important and essential. But when you are grounded in your Imago Dei, you don't feel so defensive to
Mm,
controlling the environment around you, because the environment within you is at peace. And so you can be open to new ideas. You can be curious
mm,
about innovation, and you can explore without feeling threatened or defensive about what might change or be different. And so it's actually very, very liberating,
mhm.
um, to be able to engage, the times that we're in and the changes that might be necessary or explored.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I love that idea that environment within you is at peace.
yeah, I said in my book, and actually I have bookmarks that I made that say like our inner home needs our
Yeah.
love,
The
or
home within ourselves needs our loving attention. I have it written
yeah, yeah.
here.
And
Yeah.
again, like I'm not speaking as someone who's just throwing out platitudes. I'm speaking as someone who's highly anxious and who
Yeah.
feels a lot of upheaval from day to day because of anxiety. And I am saying that we have a home within ourselves that we can tend to, and we can create, you know, whatever we need from it, whatever needs to be hung in there, whatever needs to be cleaned out, whatever needs to be set in order, like whatever it is, we can we we can tap into that without anyone telling us what it looks like, and we can decide
Yeah.
and trust it. That's what this is about. And the other thing I'll say, and it's another quote in my book, is that tight grips um, leave no room for abundance, but open hands or whatever are a divine invitation.
Mm,
So if I'm engaging community, or if I'm engaging change that makes me nervous, you know, an open grip is the posture I want, because that's the posture that is at ease. It doesn't mean you have to make big radical changes. It's just saying like, don't clench your fists. That's not, you're leaving no room for potential abundance when you do that.
mm. Yeah. Yeah. Because when you're holding on,
Yeah,
you
you're just
can't
like
receive. Yeah, you can't receive what's
yeah.
coming. Yeah. Um, so this other part that is really sticking out to me this time around is this chapter on stepping out of politeness. And you talk about, being in elementary school and having to learn to mind your manners and all that. And then you say, now, as a matter of great urgency, I am learning to unmind them. And and then you talk about all the ways that politeness can really get in the way of growth and expansion and truth telling. And something I don't I this didn't stick out to me the first time. And this is the benefit of we should read books we love twice, because it's like you read it the second time, you're like, oh man. So you talked about the ways that sometimes the fruits of the spirit get misused, to like sort of keep us quiet. And these lines were just so powerful to me, that you said patient. This is the bad version. Patience means waiting for the other side of eternity to experience equity. Kindness means never speaking out of turn and always watching our tone and manners. Self-control means stifling every vulnerable or rage-filled emotion. But then you turn it around and you kind of redefine those terms, and so you say patience becomes the stamina to bear witness to each other's pain. kindness becomes our willingness to make way for what is true, no matter how uncomfortable. And I just loved the way you reframed all of that, and your closing sentence of that chapter is to you say no bullshit rules that don't do anything but keep us small. So on this topic of politeness, I just this is maybe a more lighthearted question, but it's serious at the same time. Like, what is a bullshit rule that the church could do without?
Oh, well, I like to talk about the unspoken rules.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean.
There's all kinds of rules. Like I um I will often wear like spaghetti strap clothing because
Mhm.
I'm like, if I'm preaching or speaking on Facebook Live or something, like
Yeah.
I will wear the clothing that as women we put on and we're like, oh, I've got to cover up. This isn't appropriate.
Mhm.
So I will challenge myself to not do that because that's an unspoken rule that does not do anything for me, doesn't do anything for you. Like it doesn't lead us closer to God. It's like it's in fact all it does is play into harmful patriarchal messaging. Um, but also like it's kind of my way of filtering out. So if someone comes and they think I'm not dressed properly, then they can at least know right off the bat, like this may not be my community. Um, so yeah,
Mm.
I mean, there's all kinds of. Everyone could probably think of one. That's a good discussion question. I have a discussion guide for people interested in doing a book study that I wrote. It's um, filled with creative prompts and conversation starters. And I wish I would have put that in there. I can't remember what I put. It's there's ones for every chapter. It's on the publishing website, but yeah, I'm like, oh, that would have been a good one.
So people can just go to like broadleaf
Yeah.
dot com or whatever it is,
Yeah,
and
Broadleaf Books, type in my name or the book's name, and down below there's a link to the PDF. It's a free, it's been copy edited, and it's like 5 pages, and it's just online. So I
yeah,
wish I put that on my website. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So speaking of your website, yeah, how can people find you, connect with you, follow you?
Yeah. I mean, I wish people would follow me on Instagram because that's my favorite space because I make a lot of spoken word reels and I can't share those on Facebook. I can't share them anywhere. So they're just on Instagram. So it's at Rev Aurelia Joy, but then you can also go to my website, which is revaureliajoy.com. And I mean, you can follow me on Twitter at Rev Aurelia Joy, but I don't really use it a lot.
Yeah, so everyone who's listening, go follow Aurelia on Instagram. um, okay, so closing question, and I didn't warn you about this, so maybe you won't have an answer, but I just wondered if you might close this out by reading a paragraph or two of from a favorite section. If you, I don't know, I should have asked you this in advance. So
Yeah. Well, let me just you know what? I'll just pick something.
okay,
Oh, okay. I just opened it and I'll read this one.
okay, okay.
And it's from the Step Out of Scarcity chapter. Um okay. There are endless forms of scarcity living, but it almost is always rooted in our traumas and adverse life experiences. Something we feared was proven true, or something caused us suffering, and our survival instinct is to prevent that suffering from happening again. And our scarcity mindsets add up, they contribute to our collective posture. Our society operates out of scarcity more often than not. We are grown ass people who don't like to share. This is reflected in our immigration policies, in our healthcare system, in our obsession with guns and violence. Scarcity drives us to jealousy and comparison. Scarcity compels us to hoard our resources and our platforms. Scarcity keeps us from centering other voices. Scarcity tells us there isn't enough power or status or success to go around. And scarcity convinces us we don't have the ability to face the nuances of life or to deal with hardship and pain. We mindlessly live from this place, all while abundance is within our reach. Unconditional abundance that is not attached to what we do or don't do. Abundance that is not attached to our circumstances or our bank accounts. Abundance that is our birthright as children of God. We have the power of Imago Dei making up our DNA, coursing through our veins, making our bones strong, filling us with spirit, offering access to every divine resource, holy capacity.
Mm. How full circle that we would end on that note, Imago Dei.
Yeah.
Mm. Thank you so much, Aurelia. It was really a joy to get to talk with you.
Thanks so much. And
And I hope everybody needs to go buy this book. They haven't.
it's pretty. It
It
feels
is.
good.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.